Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Dr. Viridian, Mr. Welsh said, tapping her failed test where she'd incorrectly listed humans as having just 4 redundant organs. This is precisely the kind of basic anatomical error I'm concerned about. I understand the unique challenges you face as a non-human practitioner. Your surgical skills may surpass mine, and that of many of my colleagues, but humans do have more redundant organs than you think. You must master these fundamentals, or I'll have no choice but failing you this semester. Mr. Welsh's words lingered in the air of the lecture hall as he gathered his papers and tucked them into his worn leather briefcase. The room, with its ascending rows of seats and desks forming a semicircle around the central teaching area, gradually emptied as the other students filed out. The pristine white walls were decorated with basic diagrams of human anatomy, diagrams that now seemed to mock Kaya as she stood alone at her desk, staring down at the red marks that covered her test paper. Just 6 months ago, she had been Dr. Kaya Viridian, head physician at Arcrad's premier medical research facility, respected, accomplished, at the peak of her career, and now she was struggling to pass the most basic courses at Nova Terra University's School of Medicine, outperformed by younger humans with a fraction of her experience. The irony was almost too much to bear. She had saved countless lives, performed complex surgeries that these students could only dream of attempting, and yet here she was, failing a test on human anatomical redundancies. The humiliation burned in her chest, or rather, in both sides of her chest, where her 2 hearts beat in a synchronized beat. On the surface, humans and Arcadians shared many similarities. Both species walked upright on 2 legs, communicated through similar facial expressions, and possessed the same general body structure. But beneath the skin, the differences were profound. Where humans had 1 heart, Arcadians had 2. Where humans had 2 lungs, Arcadians had 1 larger, more efficient organ. The list went on, most of still confusing to her. Kaya's silver hair and eyelashes, along with her deep green skin, marked her instantly as non-human. Yet, in her few months on Nova Terra, she had noticed that humans themselves displayed remarkable variation in skin tone, from pale pink beige to rich brown and many shades between. The diversity had made it easier for her to form friendships, as humans seemed accustomed to differences in appearance. It was the internal differences that were proving most challenging to learn. Tired of standing alone in the empty lecture hall, Kaya finally gathered her belongings and tucked the failed test into her bag. As she made her way down the tiered steps, her mind raced with potential solutions. The university had an extensive medical library, one of the reasons she had chosen this institution for her studies. But when she had mentioned using it to the other students, they had laughed. "The library?" one human woman had said, her eyebrows raised as if mocking Kaya. "Everything you need is on the internet. Nobody uses physical books anymore unless they're forced to for some obscure research project, or because of some weird professor." Kaya had taken their advice, attempting to navigate the human internet for anatomical information. That had led to another awkward exchange when she had asked, in all seriousness, how one obtained permission to access images of naked humans for study purposes. The eruption of laughter that followed had made her green skin darken with embarrassment. "Just use the internet," they told her between fits of giggles. "Trust me, you'll find what you're looking for soon enough." Yet another example of human humor that escaped her completely. Kaya sighed, retrieving the failed test from her bag to look at it once more as she exited the building. The questions were so basic to humans, yet so foreign to her. Perhaps it was time to consult the one human she could trust, Peter. He should be home at this hour, and if anyone would help her without judgment, it would be him. The journey from the university to Peter's apartment took only a few minutes in one of the self-driving vehicles that humans relied on for transport. As the car navigated the night traffic of Nova Terra's capital city, Kaya gazed out at the sprawling metropolis, her new home, whether she liked it or not. She had chosen Earth as her place of political asylum after the dramatic events that had forced her to leave Arkrad. That choice had granted her access to all human-controlled worlds, including Nova Terra, humanity's most recent colony and, coincidentally, the place Peter Kowalski now called home. As a fighter pilot with Earth's interstellar fleet, he could have lived anywhere. Yet, he had chosen this developing world on the edge of human space, perhaps because it offered the freedom and distance from authority that someone like him seemed to crave. The self-driving car pulled up in front of Peter's apartment complex, a modern structure of glass and steel that rose 20 stories into the night sky. Kaya hesitated before exiting the vehicle. It wasn't terribly late yet, but midnight wasn't far off, and she knew that fighter pilots like Peter often faced early mornings, even if it was just for training. Her visit might be an unwelcome burden, especially given that her reason was something as trivial as help with medical school questions. Still, Peter had told her repeatedly that he owed her his life, that she could count on him for anything, any time. Perhaps it was time to test just how sincere those offers had been. The lobby of the apartment building was quiet at this hour, the annoying noise of the climate control system the only sound as Kaya made her way to the elevator. The ride to the 8th floor was swift and silent, giving her little time to reconsider her impromptu visit. Before she knew it, she was standing in front of apartment number 5, her hand raised to activate the door chime. She waited several moments before the door slid open to reveal Peter, shirtless and rubbing his eyes, his hair disheveled. It was clear she had woken him, and for a moment guilt flooded through her. Peter Kowalski stood in the doorway, his white skin a strong contrast to her green complexion. His brown hair was a mess, sticking up at odd angles, and the slight stubble on his face indicated he hadn't shaved in a day or two. Despite having clearly been asleep, his body still showed the toned physique of a military pilot, broad shoulders, defined arms, and a chest that was mostly smooth, save for a thin trail of hair that ran down his center. Kaya's gaze lingered a moment too long on that chest, and when she looked up, she saw that Peter had noticed her attention. A small, amused smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Doc," he said, breaking the silence, "what are you doing here so late?" His smile widened to a grin. "Don't tell me. You came here to study human male anatomy?" Kaya couldn't help but smile in return. "Close. More like I need some help with general human anatomy." Peter's eyes widened, clearly not expecting his joke to have landed anywhere near reality. He blinked several times, as if making sure he wasn't still dreaming, then reached to the side of the doorframe and switched on the light. "Well, in that case, you better come in," he said, stepping aside to allow her entry. Kaya walked past him unceremoniously. This wasn't her first time in Peter's apartment. They had shared dinner at least 7 times since her arrival on Nova Terra. The only difference was that she had never stayed this late, much less arrived at such an hour. The interior of Peter's apartment was sparsely furnished, with just enough to suggest that someone lived there without quite making it feel like a home. A grey sofa faced a large view screen mounted on the wall. A small dining table with 2 chairs stood near the kitchen area. There were almost no decorations, save for a framed image of what Kaya assumed was Earth's solar system, and a small model of a fighter spacecraft that sat on a shelf. The apartment was relatively clean, though Kaya noticed 2 empty water bottles on the coffee table, and a jacket thrown haphazardly over the back of the sofa. Signs that the place was slightly messier than when he had invited her over for dinner. Still, for a bachelor pilot, his living space was remarkably tidy. "So," Peter said, closing the door behind her, "what's this talk about anatomy? I mean, I was joking, but—" Kaya turned to face him, her expression professional despite the unusual circumstances. "I failed a test today," she said, her voice clinical and detached, "on human anatomical redundancies. Apparently, I severely underestimated how many backup systems your species possesses. My professor was quite concerned." She hesitated, then added, "I tried looking for information online, as my classmates suggested, but when I asked about how to get permission to access images of naked humans for study purposes, they all laughed at me. Apparently, that's some sort of joke to your species that I don't understand." Peter's reaction was immediate. He burst out laughing, doubling over and slapping his knee. "You came all the way here in the middle of the night because you don't know how to use the internet to find what you're looking for?" he managed between fits of laughter. Kaya crossed her arms, her posture stiffening. Even Peter, the one human she thought would understand, was making fun of her. "Need I remind you," she said, her voice cooling several degrees, "that I saved your life from becoming a laboratory experiment? The least you could do is help me with my educational questions, without getting carried away by some human inner joke that I clearly don't understand." Peter's laughter faded, and his expression became serious. "You're right. I'm sorry," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "That was insensitive of me. Look, if what you want is to learn how to use the internet for that purpose, I can certainly help you. But I suspect what you really want is genuine, useful human anatomy material, right?" He ran a hand through his messy hair. "If the subject is basic enough, I might be able to help you myself. Fighter pilots have to study a fair bit of medical knowledge, emergency procedures, understanding the effects of G-forces on different body systems, that sort of thing." Kaya's posture relaxed as she recognized the genuine offer of help. She reached into her purse and retrieved the failed test. "Here," she said, offering it to him. "This is what I'm struggling with." Peter took the paper, and his eyes widened slightly at the low grade marked in red at the top. His expression grew more serious as he scanned the questions. "Wait a minute," he said, looking up at her with a mixture of confusion and alarm. "How could you have saved my life and performed brain surgery on me after I crashed on your world without even knowing how many redundant organs humans have?" Kaya shrugged slightly. "I relied on technology to understand the basic cause of your trauma. The procedure to alleviate pressure on your skull was relatively simple. Just cutting the bone and extracting the clotted blood with a narrow tube. It's not that different from how we would treat an Arcadian with similar injuries." Peter's hand moved unconsciously to his head. His fingers traced where the incision must have been, his expression distant as if recalling the moment of impact when his ship had crashed. After a moment, he sighed and refocused on the test paper. "I can help you with these questions," he said. "The basic human anatomy might be alien science to you, but I'm a bit surprised you got the two lungs question wrong. It seems pretty fundamental." "My species has a single equivalent organ as the human lung," Kaya replied simply. "It's difficult for me to conceptualize having two separate lungs for the same function after a lifetime of seeing just one equivalent in our people. Arcadians have one lung, two stomachs, and two hearts. All children learn this in their first year of school." "A single lung?" Peter repeated, sounding surprised. Then his expression shifted dramatically. "Wait, did you say two hearts?" "Yes," Kaya confirmed. "Two hearts, one lung, two stomachs." Peter stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "Two hearts," he said again, his voice softer. He looked to the side, a small smile forming. "I mean, that explains why you would give up your medical career, your freedom, and shed tears for someone like me." He paused, then added, "That's too much empathy for a single heart to handle." Kaya felt both her hearts beat faster at his words. Why couldn't he always be like this? Sincere, thoughtful, instead of hiding behind endless jokes. She tried to formulate a response, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply stood there, staring at him, unable to break the moment. The silence stretched between them until Peter, clearly feeling the awkwardness, attempted to break it. "Is that really true?" he asked. "About the two hearts? Because it would be really awkward if you were joking after I said all that. Still unable to find the words she wanted, Kaya took a step forward. She reached for his hand and placed them on her chest, one on each side where her heart beat steadily beneath her rib cage. She closed her eyes, allowing him to feel the dual rhythm. She noticed a warmth spreading through her at his touch, a pleasant sensation she hadn't anticipated. But the moment was broken when Peter exclaimed, "Holy shit! You do have two hearts! That's amazing!" Kaya opened her eyes and stared at him, suddenly annoyed by his childlike reaction. "Can you help me with my questions or not?" she asked sharply. Peter laughed, seemingly unaffected by her change in tone. "Of course," he said. Then, as if suddenly remembering they were still standing, he added, "Why don't you take a seat on the sofa while I read through your test completely?" Kaya complied, moving to the sofa and sitting down. Peter joined her a moment later, close enough that their shoulders almost touched as he studied the test paper. After a few minutes of silence, he looked up. "Well, besides the obvious pet organs that you got right, ears, eyes, memory glands, there are also the lungs, the kidneys, and others that differ between males and females." Kaya looked him straight in the eyes, unimpressed. "You're not a very good teacher," she said, elbowing him lightly in the arm. "I'm a professional who has seen everything about my own species. I'm not a child who needs carefully chosen words." Peter smirked apologetically. "Sorry," he said. "Unlike you, I've never handled these topics professionally. I'm afraid I'll make it into a joke if I talk about it directly." He sighed, running a hand through his hair again. "And that wouldn't be helpful if you need a serious explanation." Kaya was slightly surprised, her jaw dropping. "How can a grown man say that?" she asked incredulously. "At least teach me how to search the human network so I can find what I need. You said the internet has everything, didn't you?" Peter scratched the back of his neck, looking apologetic again. "I'm sorry. I just think you need a full, in-depth explanation. And there are other people far more qualified than me." He gestured towards the failed test. "By the looks of this, you need much more than just knowing about redundancy in human organs. You need to understand the muscles, the bones, the nerves, the whole picture. I could only help you a little, and my opinion isn't worth the risk of teaching you something wrong." Kaya crossed her arms, frustration evident on her green features. "So what am I going to do then?" "I could teach you how to use the internet properly," Peter offered. "Show you where to find reliable medicinal resources, how to access the university's online library databases, that sort of thing." Kaya considered his words. Logically, this was indeed the best option. Learning how to access the information herself would be more valuable in the long run than having him explain a few concepts tonight. But why was that so unsatisfying? She had come all this way for exactly that purpose, so why did his offer anger her? Her eyes settled on his form again, his strong arms, the curve of his back, the flat plane of his belly. The realization hit her suddenly, like a diagnostic alert on one of her medical screens back home. She abruptly took the failed test from his hands, her movements decisive. "I'm sure you can help me," she said with newfound confidence. "And you don't even need to say a word if you don't want to." Peter stared at her, confusion evident in his expression. "What was that? Why did you take the paper from me like that? What do you mean by helping you?" Kaya didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached out, touching his neck with the tips of her fingers. Slowly, deliberately, she traced a path downward, first his chest, then the muscles below his armpits, and all the way down to his belly button. She retracted her hand and stared directly into his shocked eyes. "I'm a perfectly capable medical doctor," she said, her voice steady despite the wild beating of her twin hearts. "I'm more than competent enough to learn everything by myself." She leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing his ear as she whispered, "That is, if I have a patient to extensively examine." Peter recoiled, creating distance between them on the sofa. Kaya's heart beat out of synchrony as she observed his reaction. The world seemed to fall apart around her as she waited to hear what he would say. Had she misread the situation? Had she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? Why now? Peter finally broke the silence, his voice a mixture of confusion and something else Kaya couldn't quite place. Why are you asking this so suddenly after nothing happened all those times I invited you over for dinner? He didn't even wait for her reply before continuing, the words tumbling out. Why did you always find excuses to leave quickly every time you've been here? He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself. I'm saying this not because I think you owe me anything, but because I assumed you just wanted friendship, or that you knew something I didn't about us being, incompatible. Kaya's thoughts raced at his sudden bombardment of feelings. Why had she found excuses to depart every time he invited her, and yet accepted his invitations cheerfully each time? What had she been afraid of? In that moment, understanding dawned on her, about herself, her fears, her defenses. Without considering the implications, she shared this realization with him. The past decade has been nothing but work for me, she admitted. No personal life, no connections beyond professional ones. I'm rusty when it comes to handling matters of the heart. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. The way I've acted has little to do with you being human and more to do with how much of a mess my personal life is. Peter's eyes widened, and then his face shifted into a smile. Does that mean we're compatible? He asked without hesitation, hope evident in his voice. Kaya felt a spark ignite within her, doubt melting away like morning frost under Arkrad's sun. She reached out again, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his single heartbeat rapidly beneath her palm. I don't know that, she said, her voice soft but gaining confidence. But I know a few methods to check. Through science, through investigation of whether there are such mixed couples among our species. She leaned closer, her lips once again near his ear. But my favorite is trial and error. His reply came as a kiss, sudden and rough, pressing her back against the couch. The intensity surprised her, but in the most pleasant way possible. His lips were warmer than an Arcadian's would be, his single heart beating with enough force to make up for having just one. When their lips finally parted, he smiled down at her. You're gonna get yourself a human anatomy lesson, Doc, he murmured, his voice husky. An all-night-long lesson. The next morning, Kaya found herself regaining consciousness in an unfamiliar room. As awareness returned, memories of the night before flooded back, bringing a smile to her face. Peter had exaggerated a bit about the all-night lesson. He had eventually succumbed to exhaustion, but she was happy nonetheless. Their clothes were scattered everywhere across the floor of his bedroom, while they shared a thin blanket on his bed. Peter was still asleep beside her, a smile on his face even in slumber. She had learned quite a bit about human anatomy, though perhaps not in the way her professor would have approved. Still, she wasn't concerned about the gap in her knowledge anymore. After all, the semester was still in its middle phase, and she was sure Peter would be very cooperative with her educational needs from now on. Kaya propped herself up on one elbow, studying Peter's sleeping form with both clinical interest and affection. The differences between their species were real, but less significant than she had feared. His breathing was steady, his chest rising and falling in a pattern that was hypnotic to watch. Humans needed more sleep than Arcadians, another difference she had discovered. On Arkrad, she would have been awake and productive for at least an hour already, but here, in this moment, she found she didn't mind the slower pace. Sunlight entered through the half-closed blinds, casting some light inside. Morning on Nova Terra was beautiful. The colony's red sun created a unique quality of light that couldn't be found on Earth or Arkrad. It seemed fitting that this new chapter in her life would begin here, on a world that was itself a blend of the familiar and the unexplored. She thought back to the events that had brought her here, the prison break, the harrowing escape, the political asylum process, all because she had chosen to save one human patient instead of allowing him to become a test subject. If someone had told her then that she would end up in that very human's bed, studying for medical exams on his world, she would have dismissed it as delusional. Yet here she was. Life, it seemed, had a way of charting courses that no medical scanner could predict. Peter stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he seemed disoriented. Then his gaze focused on her and he smiled. "Good morning, doctor," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "How was your anatomy lesson?" Kaya couldn't help but smile in return. "Informative," she replied, "though I believe I'll need several follow-up sessions to fully grasp the material." "Is that your professional opinion?" He reached up, tracing the line of her jaw with his fingertips. The touch sent a pleasant shiver through her. "It is," she said, leaning into his touch. "Very professional." "Well, who am I to argue with a doctor?" he murmured, pulling her closer. "Even if she does think humans only have 4 redundant organs." She laughed, a sound that surprised even herself. When was the last time she had laughed like that? Before the prison, certainly. Before Peter crashed on Arkrad. Perhaps even before she became head physician. Somewhere along the way, joy had become a foreign concept. Until now. "I'm learning," she said, pressing her forehead against his. "Humans are more complicated than I initially thought." "We have our moments," he agreed. His expression grew more serious. "Kaya, about last night. I don't want you to think that this was just—" She placed a finger over his lips, stopping his words. "I know," she said. "This wasn't just about anatomy lessons, or fulfilling curiosity. Not for me." Relief washed over his features. "Good," he said, "because I've wanted this, wanted you, since you saved my life. I just never thought it was possible." "You never asked," she pointed out. "You always left so quickly after dinner," he countered. "I thought you weren't interested." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, but of what it would mean. My life on Arkrad had no room for personal attachments. I never learned how to balance work and, this." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is." "Let's figure it out together," Peter suggested. "You're already learning human anatomy. Why not add human relationships to the curriculum?" Kaya laughed again. "Is that included in my tuition?" "Special discount for alien doctors who save pilots from becoming lab experiments," he said with a grin. She kissed him then, marveling at how natural it felt despite their differences. When they separated, a thought occurred to her. "What time is it?" she asked suddenly. Peter glanced at the digital display next to his bed. "Just past 8. Why?" Kaya sat up abruptly. "I have class at 9." "Skip it," Peter suggested, reaching for her. She was tempted, more tempted than she would have expected, but shook her head. "I can't. It's Professor Welch's lecture on human neurological systems. If I miss it after failing his test—" Peter sighed dramatically, but nodded in understanding. "Rain check on the following up anatomy lesson, then?" "Definitely," she promised, already scanning the floor for her scattered clothing. "Tonight?" "I'll be here," he assured her. "Your personal reference material." He wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Kaya rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress her smile. As she gathered her clothes and headed for the bathroom, she felt lighter than she had in years. The failed test that had seemed so devastating yesterday now felt like a minor obstacle, one she would overcome for sure. 4 months had passed since Kaya's failed test and that fateful night in Peter's apartment. 4 months of anatomy lessons and affection that had transformed both her academic standing and personal life. Seasons had changed on Nova Terra, spring giving way to a warm summer. As the last students filed out, their excited chatter about weekend plans fading into the corridor, Professor Welch gathered his materials at the podium. She remained in her seat, watching as Professor Welch organized his notes and digital teaching aids. The projection on the whiteboard showed the complex neural pathways of the human brain, the last slide of the closing lecture of this semester. "Dr. Viridian," Professor Welch called, noticing she hadn't left with the others. "Do you have a moment?" Kaya nodded and made her way down to the front of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the now empty space. The professor's expression was unreadable as she approached, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the stack of data tablets containing their graded tests. I wanted to speak with you about your recent performance, he said, and then his serious expression broke into a smile. Quite frankly, it's extraordinary. He handed her a tablet displaying her latest test results, a perfect score, marked in green rather than the red that had adorned her first attempt 4 months ago. You're the only student who achieved full marks on this exam, Professor Welsh continued. And your last 3 tests have been similarly impressive. I must say, whatever study method you've adopted has proven remarkably effective. Kaya accepted the tablet, her green fingers contrasting against its sleek white surface. Thank you, Professor. I'm particularly impressed by your detailed knowledge of human anatomical variations, Welsh said, gesturing towards the holographic display. Your essay on redundant systems and their evolutionary advantages was publishable quality. Kaya smiled, remembering the countless study sessions with Peter that had primarily contributed to that understanding. Sessions that often began with serious anatomical discussions and inevitably evolved into something more practical. I've discovered I'm much more of a practical learner than a theoretical one, she replied, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the memories warming her thoughts. Professor Welch nodded approvingly. That's often true of the best physicians. Book knowledge only takes you so far in medicine. It's the hands-on experience that truly cements understanding. Exactly, Kaya agreed, suppressing a slight smile. Hands-on experience has been invaluable. Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up, Welsh said, turning off the projector with a few taps of his control panel. At this rate, you'll graduate with honors despite your challenging start. As Professor Welch headed towards the door, he paused, turning back to her. By the way, that human pilot who visits campus sometimes to meet you? Kaya felt her heart quicken slightly. Yes? He's the one who crashed on your world, isn't he? The one you treated? She nodded. He is? Welsh smiled thoughtfully. Fascinating case study. I imagine perhaps someday you'll co-author a paper on interspecies emergency medicine. Perhaps we will, Kaya replied. As Professor Welsh left, his footsteps fading down the corridor, Kaya stood alone in the lecture hall, reflecting on how far she had come. From a failed test and a desperate late-night visit to becoming the top student in her class. Quite the achievement in her own opinion. She smiled to herself as she gathered her things. Peter would be waiting for her at their home, as she now thought of his place. In just 4 months, she had found not only academic success, but something she had never expected. A sense of belonging. 2 worlds, 2 species, and somehow they had built a bridge between them. One boring life behind, and another more exciting ahead of them.